we are the biggest podcast in the world within our genre. That's not saying much, given because it's saying a lot about how few voices are in the space. One, how difficult it is to consistently deliver. We're in a unique position, I feel, on the continent in terms of white space within the context of like the commercial opportunity of making media, or frankly doing anything. My thesis, the lived thesis, which you might apply and doesn't work for you, but I suspect it might work to a certain extent. My thesis is that if you're able to identify a value that's a mutually assigned value, that's key. Okay, so it's not about how great Andile's Take the podcast is, because I've had amazing feedback from people who don't care, all right, or people who don't value it. That was a great podcast. It's just so there was value, but it wasn't mutually assigned, or it might be grudgingly assigned from the other end. Okay, so what's key is like a mutually assigned value, right? Once you identify that value, our job as media makers of any kind, podcasting included, is to package that value, leverage our talents and abilities and skills to package it as creatively and as attractively as possible. That's key, but not as key as doing that consistently 100 weeks in a row. I would hazard being consistent is actually more important than the creativity and the how well you do it and to what extent. Because on average, I was spending upwards of 6,000 to 8,000 rand to produce 15 minutes of Andile's Take. Whereas the African Tech Roundup literally was recorded in my lounge with the laptop I had before that, which was shocking, and the very first mic you could possibly get that allowed like USB, like broadcast quality USB to mic situation, right? And proof is in the pudding. 100 weeks in a row later, the African Tech Roundup podcast is the biggest podcast in the world within its genre. It's landing both my co-host and I consulting gigs outside of the show. It's getting us invited to travel, so mostly in trade exchange opportunities. It's working, right? Now, is it paying the bills in the way I'd like it to? Maybe then the third thing I'd mention is I was in Kigali recently and I met some of my sort of tech blog counterparts from Nigeria and Kenya. Was really a treat. These are guys that I feel like I know them already but I've never met them, right? And the one guy sat me down and said, "You know what you did right over the rest of us? Like you went in, and this is, of course, he doesn't know my story fully, but he said you went in with like commercial viability drawn from elsewhere, right?" And that's true. I'm an relatively in-demand voiceover artist in this country, and that's arguably per minute, per hour, the most valuable, talent you can apply in our media industry, right? So that's definitely has to be said, that none of this would have been possible without a fairly comfortable situation in terms of just keeping the lights on at my home.